The ice bath idea is an interesting one. I mean, Wim Hof, who's the world's master at ice baths, I mean, he's been plunging himself into cold water for decades, and he is so resistant to cold and so in control of his autonomic nervous system that it's a kind of miracle. And so, we actually don't know the limit here. So here, I'll tell you something on the religious front that's worth thinking about too, in relationship to this discussion. There's an idea that's deep in Western culture, insofar as Western culture is Christian, is that that the world is founded on a sacrifice, right? And that's what the crucifix represents. And European towns were built around a church, and the church was built around an altar, and the altar was built around the idea of sacrifice. So the sacrifice, the proper sacrifice, is at the center of the community. That's what that idea means. Now, you might ask, well, what's the proper sacrifice? And the answer is something like the voluntary willingness to bear your cross. And then you might say, well, what is your cross? And the answer to that is, well, that's the catastrophe of your life, right? That's the fact you'll be betrayed, the fact that you're going to die, the fact that you're going to be in pain, the fact that your loved ones will see you suffer, the fact that the mob will come after you, the fact that criminals might be preferred to you, etc. It's all the potential catastrophes of your life. And then the sacrifice is the idea that you have to let your, what would you say? You have to let your narrow ego go enough so that you pick all that up voluntarily, all of that. And then that transforms it. And I think that's literally true. I think that's what all the psychological evidence points to, is that if you adopt a stance of voluntary challenge, even in relationship to tragedy and malevolence, that's the pathway to transcendence, like truly. Well, okay, so I've got a practical example of that might be helpful with your relationship. So, and maybe not, but maybe it'll be helpful to someone. So now and then when my wife get into an intractable battle, we'll both have that proclivity to want to be right. So you want to be right because you don't want your beliefs to fall apart, and you want to be right because then you don't have to go through the inconvenience of having to change. So you have your reasons for wanting to be right. The problem with that is you might not be right, and plus you have to live with this other person, and so you better sort out your differences. I don't think that's compromise, by the way. I think that's joint union in a higher vision. But one of the things we learn to do, if we could pull ourselves away from the fight, because you think things like, well, some of the time I'm wrong, but this time she's definitely in the wrong. And I'm going to make that point. And she feels the same way. And so, then we, come to loggerheads. We learn to leave each other and go into our separate rooms, and then to meditate for some period of time. And here's the meditation. It's like, okay, we're having this stupid argument. Definitely my wife is wrong this time, for sure. But there's some possibility that I've done something stupid sometime in the recent past, or maybe even in the distant past, that made this argument somewhat more likely, somewhat, even though she's mostly wrong. So interesting about that is if you sit and you ask yourself that, it's like, what did I do imperfectly to increase the probability of this event? You will absolutely get an answer. You'll get some little fantasy, some memory, some thought about something you did. And then if you go tell the person that, then it takes all that pride out of it. So she'll say, what she did wrong, and I'll say what I did wrong. And then we're both confronting the situation like stupid people who have something to learn instead of like intellectually prideful people who are definitely right. And then we can, well, so far, inevitably, we've been able to construct a joint vision out of the argument, that's better than either of our a priori positions. And that's also a hallmark of a healthy relationship. It's not like you meet in the middle or that you compromise. It's that you bring the conflict together. It's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, essentially. You bring the conflict together, and you bring your two viewpoints together, and you meld a third viewpoint that's better than either of the viewpoints you brought to bear on the problem. And you can generally do that, and having that humility that enables you to examine what stupid thing you did to muck up the relationship. You can meditate on that pretty much forever, right? What stupid thing did you do to muck things up? That's an inexhaustible treasure trove of wisdom, that is.
Right. And one of the worst and most uncomfortable things that we'll have to go through in our life, too. So that's yet another challenge to face in full force, and something I will admittedly say I struggle with.
Well, you know, here's something I learned as a therapist. This is also useful to know. It's not surprising that people shy away from conflict, especially if they're agreeable and somewhat neurotic, because you don't want to have conflict with someone if you're agreeable. And if you're higher in neuroticism, it makes you pretty upset. So you have your reasons not to want to have the discussion. But here's the rub, man, and this is something I learned as a therapist. Conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. Like if you have a problem with you or with your partner, then if you don't sort it out, then you're going to have that bloody problem for the rest of your life. And
absolutely,
maybe it'll be a problem that comes up every week. So that's like 50 times a year, and you're married for 30 years. So you're going to have that problem 1,500 times. 1,500 times. And maybe it'll take an hour per time. So that's 1,500 hours. And so that's 30 work weeks. That's basically a year of work of your life. That's like 2% of your life. So then you think, well, should I have a fight? And the answer is